The chandelier's prismed light fractured across the Langston dining room, casting kaleidoscope shadows on the polished oak table. Crystal glassware gleamed, each goblet catching the glow like a tiny, mocking star. Sophie Langston stood at the threshold, her worn flat silent on the Persian rug, her breath catching at the sheer weight of the room. It wasn't just the wealth, it was the coldness. The way the air seemed to hum with expectation, as if the mansion itself judged her faded cardigan and the ink stains on her fingers. She was a stranger here, though she bore the Langston name. "Sophie, darling, don't hover like a servant." Margaret Langston's voice sliced through the murmur of clinking silverware. Her mother sat at the table's head, her silver hair coiled like a crown, her emerald necklace glinting with menace. "Join us. We've been waiting." Sophie's stomach twisted. Waiting. The word carried a threat, though she couldn't name it. She forced a smile, stepping forward, her eyes flicking to her siblings, James, Claire, and Edward, lounging with the ease of those who belonged. James, in his tailored blazer, smirked over his wineglass. Claire, her pearls clicking as she tilted her head, watched Sophie with a predator's curiosity. Edward, youngest and cruelest, tapped his fork against the table, a restless rhythm that set Sophie's nerves on edge. "Did I keep you long?" Sophie asked, her voice steady despite the pulse hammering in her throat. She slid into the chair furthest from Margaret, the one with a faint crack in its mahogany armrest, a flaw, like her, in this perfect facade. "In your entire life?" James drawled, his smile sharp. The table erupted in laughter, Claire's high-pitched giggle cutting deepest. Sophie's cheeks burned, but she kept her gaze on the centerpiece, a gaudy arrangement of orchids that smelled faintly of decay. "Let's not waste time," Margaret said, her tone clipped. She raised her glass, the red wine catching the light like blood. A toast. To family. To legacy. The others echoed her, their glasses chiming in unison. Sophie lifted hers, the crystal heavy in her hand, but she didn't drink. Something was wrong. The air felt charged, like the moment before a storm. She scanned the table, searching for a clue, a glance, a gesture, but her family's faces were masks, polished and impenetrable. "Mother, you've outdone yourself," Claire said, her voice syrupy. "This table, this meal, it's a statement. The Langstons are untouchable." "Indeed," Margaret replied, her eyes locking on Sophie. "But not every Langston." Sophie's breath hitched. The words landed like a slap, their meaning unclear, but their intent unmistakable. She set her glass down, the clink loud in the sudden silence. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, her voice low, daring. Margaret's smile was a blade. "Patience, Sophie. We'll get to it." The servants entered, gliding like ghosts, their trays laden with roasted pheasant and truffle-dusted potatoes. The scent was rich, overwhelming, but Sophie's appetite vanished. She watched her family eat, their movements precise, their conversation a dance of innuendo and exclusion. James recounted a deal that had netted him millions. Claire gushed about her upcoming gala, her dress custom-made in Milan. Edward, barely 25, bragged about his new yacht, christened Langston Pride. Sophie's life, her cramped apartment, her students' earnest essays, felt like a different planet. "You're quiet, Sophie," Edward said, his fork poised midair. "No tales from the chalkboard? No inspiring young minds to share?" The mockery was blatant, but Sophie met his gaze. "I had a student today," she said evenly, "who wrote about losing his mother. He's 12. It was raw, honest, more real than anything in this room." The table stilled. Claire's lips parted, then closed. James coughed into his napkin. Margaret's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something, anger, fear, crossing her face before it smoothed over. "Charming," Marguerite said, her voice ice. "But we're not here for sentimentality. We're here for the future." Sophie's heart pounded. The future. The word hung heavy, laced with a promise she didn't trust. She leaned forward, her hands clasped to stop their trembling. And what does that future look like, Mother, for all of us? Margaret set her fork down with deliberate care. The room seemed to hold its breath, the chandelier's light pulsing like a heartbeat. "I'm glad you asked," she said, "because tonight we clarify things. The Langston legacy is not for everyone." Sophie's mouth went dry. She glanced at her siblings, expecting confusion, but their faces told a different story. James's smirk widened. Claire's eyes gleamed with anticipation. Edward leaned back, arms crossed, as if waiting for a show. They knew. They'd known all along. "Mother, please," Sophie said, her voice cracking. "If you have something to say, just—" Enough. Margaret's hand slammed the table, the crystal rattling. "You've never understood, Sophie. You've never belonged. You cling to your little life, your ideals, as if they make you noble, but they make you weak, and the Langston name is not for the weak." The words cut deeper than Sophie expected, each one a blade slicing through years of unspoken slights. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but her throat closed. Memories flashed, childhood summers ignored by her siblings, Margaret's cold dismissals, the constant sense of being less. She'd thought she'd made peace with it. She was wrong. "Tonight," Margaret continued, her voice rising, "I've amended the will. The estate, the investments, the Langston Trust. It belongs to those who uphold our values. James, Claire, Edward." She paused, her gaze pinning Sophie. "Not you." The room spun. Sophie gripped the table, her nails digging into the wood. "You're disowning me?" she whispered, the words barely audible. "Disowning?" Margaret laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "No, darling, I'm freeing you. You've never been one of us. Why pretend?" James clapped, slow and deliberate. "Well said, Mother. It's about time." "Absolutely," Claire chimed in, her smile radiant. "Sophie's better off with her books and her simplicity." Edward leaned forward, his eyes glinting. "Come on, Soph. You didn't really think you'd inherit, did you? You're not Langston material." The betrayal was a physical thing, a weight crushing her chest. Sophie stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "You planned this," she said, her voice shaking but growing stronger. "All of you. You sat here, eating, laughing, knowing you'd humiliate me." "Humiliated?" Margaret's brow arched. "This is clarity, Sophie. You've always been a guest in this family. Now you're free to leave." Sophie's eyes burned, but she refused to cry. She looked at each of them. Margaret's icy triumph, James's smug satisfaction, Claire's feigned pity, Edward's glee, and saw strangers. But something else caught her attention. A small, leather-bound book on the sideboard, its cover embossed with the Langston crest. She'd never seen it before, yet it felt significant. A clue, perhaps, to why this was happening. "You're wrong," Sophie said, her voice steady now. "I'm more Langston than any of you. Not because of money or status, but because I know what family should be. And this," she gestured to the table, the mansion, their smug faces, "this is a lie." Margaret's smile faltered, just for a second. "Get out," she said, her voice low. "You're no longer welcome here." Sophie turned, her steps echoing in the vast room, but as she reached the door she paused, her hand on the frame. That book, she needed to know what it was, and there was something else. Edward's earlier comment, a fleeting mention of the old man's secrets. Their grandfather, long dead, had been the only one kind to her. Could he have left something, some truth, that Margaret feared? She glanced back, meeting Margaret's gaze. "This isn't over," she said, the words a promise. Then she stepped into the hall, the mansion's shadows swallowing her, her mind racing with questions. Why now? What were they hiding? And what did that book hold? The front door loomed ahead, but Sophie's resolve hardened. She wouldn't leave Connecticut, not yet. The Langstons thought they'd won, but they'd underestimated her. She'd find the truth, whatever it cost. The Langston mansion's grand hall swallowed Sophie's footsteps as she fled the dining room, her heart pounding in rhythm with the echo of Margaret's final words. "You're no longer welcome here." The air was thick with the scent of polished wood and old money, but it felt suffocating, like the walls themselves were closing in. She paused at the foot of the sweeping staircase, her hand gripping the banister, her mind a storm of betrayal and defiance. She'd meant what she said. This wasn't over. But the weight of her family's rejection pressed against her chest, and for a moment she wondered if she had the strength to fight. Behind her, the dining room doors swung open, spilling light and laughter into the hall. Sophie froze, her breath catching as her father, Henry Langston, stepped out. His silhouette was stooped, his gray hair catching the chandelier's glow, but his face was shadowed, unreadable. She waited, hoping for a word, a glance, anything to soften the sting of his silence during Margaret's announcement. He'd sat there, hands folded, eyes fixed on his plate, as her mother had stripped her from the family will. His inaction had been louder than Margaret's cruelty. "Dad?" Sophie's voice was barely a whisper, fragile with hope. Henry's head lifted, his eyes meeting hers for a fleeting second. There was something there, regret perhaps, or shame, but it vanished as quickly as it came. He cleared his throat, adjusting his cufflinks, a nervous habit she'd seen 1,000 times. "You should go, Sophie," he said, his voice low, almost gentle. "It's for the best." The words hit like a slap. Sophie's grip on the banister tightened, her nails digging into the wood. "The best?" she echoed, her voice shaking. "You sat there, Dad. You let her say those things, let them laugh, and you didn't say a word. Not one." Henry's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "You don't understand," he said, his tone strained. "This family, it's complicated." "Complicated?" Sophie stepped closer, her anger flaring. "Disowning me is complicated? Humiliating me in front of everyone is complicated? You're my father. You're supposed to—" She stopped, her throat closing. Supposed to what? Love her? Protect her? The Henry she'd known as a child, the one who'd read her bedtime stories, who'd once called her his little scholar, was gone, replaced by this stranger who couldn't meet her eyes. Before Henry could respond, the dining room erupted in a chorus of clinking glasses and voices raised in unison. "To the Langston legacy!" Margaret's voice rang out, sharp and triumphant, followed by James's booming laugh and Claire's syrupy agreement. Sophie's stomach churned. They were toasting, celebrating her exclusion, as if she'd never existed. Henry flinched, a small, involuntary movement, but he didn't turn back. "Go home, Sophie," he said, his voice barely audible. "Please." Then he retreated into the dining room, the doors closing behind him, sealing her out. Sophie stood rooted, her chest heaving, tears burning her eyes. She wanted to scream, to barge back in and demand answers, but the weight of their rejection held her back. And yet beneath the pain, a spark of resolve flickered. They thought they could erase her, but they were wrong. She was a Langston, whether they liked it or not, and she'd find a way to prove it. The hall's silence was broken by the sharp rap of footsteps on the marble floor. Sophie turned, startled, as a man approached from the foyer. He was older, perhaps 60, with a weathered face and a suit that looked expensive but slightly rumpled, as if he'd been traveling. His briefcase, leather and scuffed, swung at his side, and his eyes, sharp, assessing, locked on hers. "Ms. Sophie Langston?" he asked, his voice carrying a faint Boston accent. She nodded, wary. "Who are you?" "William Carter," he said, offering a curt nod. I'm the family lawyer, or rather, I was your grandmother Elizabeth's lawyer." He paused, his gaze flicking to the dining room doors. "I need to speak with you, and them, now." Sophie's pulse quickened. Elizabeth Langston, her grandmother, had died 5 years ago, leaving a void Sophie still felt. She'd been the only one in the family to see Sophie for who she was, not what she lacked. But why was her lawyer here, now, after Margaret's announcement? "What's this about?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. William's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Justice, perhaps. Follow me?" He strode toward the dining room, not waiting for her response. Sophie hesitated, then followed, her curiosity outweighing her dread. The doors swung open, and the scene inside hit her like a wave. Margaret at the table's head, glass raised mid-toes, James leaning back, smug, Claire twirling a pearl necklace, Edward grinning like a cat with a mouse. Henry sat apart, his face pale, his hands clenched in his lap. The air was thick with triumph, but it shattered as William stepped forward, Sophie at his heels. "Who the hell are you?" James demanded, his glass slamming onto the table. "William Carter," the lawyer said, his tone calm but edged with steel. "I represent the estate of Elizabeth Langston, and I have an announcement that concerns you all." Margaret's smile froze. "Elizabeth's estate was settled years ago," she said, her voice clipped. "You have no business here." "Oh, but I do," William replied, setting his briefcase on the table with a deliberate thud. He snapped it open, pulling out a thick, sealed envelope embossed with the Langston crest, the same crest Sophie had seen on the leather-bound book the night before. Her heart skipped. Was there a connection? "Get to the point," Edward snapped, his earlier glee replaced by irritation. William ignored him, his eyes finding Sophie's. "Elizabeth Langston left a second will," he said, his voice carrying through the room. "One she entrusted to me, to be revealed only under specific conditions. Those conditions have been met." The room stilled. Sophie's breath caught, her mind racing. A second will? Elizabeth had always been secretive, her love for Sophie quiet but fierce. Could she have planned something the family didn't know about? "What conditions?" Claire asked, her voice sharp, her pearls forgotten. William's gaze didn't waver from Sophie. "That Sophie Langston be present, and that the family's true nature be revealed." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Tonight, you've made that abundantly clear." Margaret's face drained of color. "This is preposterous," she hissed. "Elizabeth's estate was divided. There's nothing left." "Rom," William said, breaking the seal on the envelope with a slow, deliberate tear. "Elizabeth left a separate trust, valued at $5 million, and she named a sole heir." He pulled out a document, its pages crisp and official, and held it up. "Sophie Langston." The room exploded. James shot to his feet, his chair toppling. $5 million! "That's impossible!" Claire's glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. Edward swore, his face red with fury. Henry's head snapped up, his eyes wide, but he said nothing. Sophie stood frozen, her mind reeling. $5 million? From Elizabeth? It didn't make sense. She'd never cared about money, only her grandmother's love. But the weight of the family's stares, shock, envy, rage, pressed against her, and she felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "This is a fraud," Margaret said, her voice low and dangerous. "Elizabeth was senile. She couldn't have—" "Elizabeth was sharper than any of you," William cut in, his tone icy. "She saw what you were, vultures circling for scraps. She wanted Sophie to have something you couldn't touch." Sophie's eyes burned, not with tears, but with a sudden, fierce gratitude. Elizabeth had seen her, even in death, but the joy was fleeting, drowned by the family's fury. James rounded the table, his face inches from William's. "You think you can waltz in here and rewrite our legacy? I'll have you disbarred." Try it," William said, unfazed. "The will is ironclad. I drafted it myself." Claire turned to Sophie, her eyes glittering with venom. "You knew, didn't you? You played the poor little teacher, but you were scheming all along." "I didn't know," Sophie said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "But I'm glad she did this. It's proof she believed in me, not you." Eward laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Believed in you? You're nothing, Sophie. This is a mistake, and we'll fix it." "Enough!" Margaret's voice cracked like a whip. She stood, her hands braced on the table, her eyes boring into William. "You've had your moment. Now leave before I call security." William didn't move. "One more thing," he said, pulling a small, sealed letter from the envelope. "Elizabeth left this for Sophie. She said it would explain everything." Sophie's heart lurched. "A letter?" She reached for it, but Margaret lunged, snatching it from William's hand. "This is Langston property," she hissed, clutching the letter to her chest. "That's not yours," Sophie said, stepping forward, her fear giving way to fury. "Give it to me." Margaret's smile was venomous. "You want it? Take it." The challenge hung in the air, the room silent except for the faint tick of the grandfather clock. Sophie's eyes flicked to Henry, hoping, foolishly, for support. But he looked away, his hands trembling, his silence a fresh betrayal. She turned back to Margaret, her resolve hardening. "I will," she said, her voice low but firm. Before anyone could react, the dining room doors burst open and a gust of cold air swept through the room. A woman stood in the doorway, her face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, her coat dripping from the rain outside. "Am I late?" she asked, her voice smooth and unfamiliar. Margaret's face paled. James froze, his mouth open. Claire gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Henry stood, his chair scraping, and for the first time that night, he spoke. "No," he whispered, his voice raw. "It can't be." Sophie stared at the woman, her mind racing. Who was she? And why did her arrival feel like the final piece of a puzzle she didn't yet understand? The leather-bound book flashed in her memory, its crest matching the one on William's envelope. Elizabeth's letter burned in Margaret's hand, and somewhere, deep in the mansion's shadows, the truth waited. The Langston dining room pulsed with chaos, the air thick with the scent of spilled wine and shattered crystal. Sophie stood at the center of the storm, her heart hammering as the mysterious woman's arrival sent ripples of shock through her family. Margaret clutched Elizabeth's letter, her knuckles white, her face a mask of fury. James loomed over William Carter, the lawyer, his threats hanging like thunder. Claire's pearls clicked nervously, her eyes darting to the stranger in the doorway. Edward's smirk had vanished, replaced by a scowl. And Henry sat frozen, his whispered, "It can't be," echoing in Sophie's mind like a warning. The woman stepped forward, her coat dripping onto the Persian rug, her wide-brimmed hat casting shadows across her face. "I see I've interrupted," she said, her voice smooth, almost amused. She tilted her head, revealing sharp cheekbones and eyes that glittered with secrets. "Good. You Langstons always did love a spectacle." "Who are you?" Sophie asked, her voice cutting through the tension. She felt the weight of every gaze, her family's, William's, the strangers', but she held her ground, her pride a shield against the humiliation still burning from Margaret's toast to her exclusion. The woman's lips curved, not quite a smile. Someone who knows the Langstons better than they know themselves. "Call me Evelyn." She glanced at Margaret, her eyes narrowing. "And I'm here to ensure Elizabeth's wishes are honored." Margaret's hand tightened on the letter, the paper crinkling. "Elizabeth's wishes?" she spat. "This is a farce. You, Carter, this woman, you're all part of some scheme to undermine us." William adjusted his glasses, unruffled. The only scheme here is yours, Margaret. You thought you could erase Sophie from the family, but Elizabeth saw through you. Sophie's chest tightened, a flood of memories rushing in. Summers with Elizabeth in her modest cottage, away from the mansion's cold grandeur. She'd sit on the porch, Elizabeth's hand warm in hers, listening to stories of the Langston past. Tales of love and loss that never made it into the family's polished narrative. Sophie had brought her students poems, shared her dreams, and Elizabeth had listened, her eyes bright with pride. "You're the heart of this family," she'd said once, her voice fierce. "Don't let them dim your light." The rest of the family had rarely visited, too busy with their deals and galas. Now, Elizabeth's $5 million trust felt like a final act of love, a recognition of Sophie's kindness in a family that valued none. Elizabeth was delusional, James snapped, his voice pulling Sophie back. She always had a soft spot for strays. Strays? Sophie's voice was low, but it carried, silencing the room. She stepped toward James, her anger flaring, bright and unyielding. "She saw me. She saw all of you, too. Your greed, your cruelty. That's why she did this." Claire laughed, a brittle sound. "Oh, please, Sophie, you're no saint. You visited her to worm your way into her will." The accusation stung, but Sophie didn't flinch. She thought of the ink stains on her fingers, the late nights grading papers, the students who called her Miss Langston with trust in their eyes. She'd never wanted Elizabeth's money, only her love. "I visited because I loved her," she said, her voice steady. "Can any of you say the same?" The room fell silent, the truth a blade no one could dodge. Edward shifted, his bravado faltering. Claire's lips parted, but no words came. James's jaw clenched, his eyes flicking to Margaret, as if waiting for her to take control. Henry stared at his hands, his silence a weight Sophie could no longer bear. "Dad," she said, turning to him, her voice raw. "You were there too. You saw how they treated her, how they ignored her. Why didn't you stop this? Why didn't you stand up for me?" Henry's head lifted, his eyes meeting hers, and for a moment she saw the father she'd once known, tired, broken, but still hers. "Sophie," he whispered, his voice cracking. I couldn't. Margaret cut in, her voice like ice. "Don't be weak, Henry. She's not worth it." The words were a spark to Sophie's resolve. She straightened, her pride surging, a fire that refused to be extinguished. She wouldn't break. Not here, not now. She looked at each of them. Margaret's cold triumph, James's smug disdain, Claire's feigned pity, Edward's restless cruelty, and saw a stranger's. But Evelyn's presence, William's calm certainty, and the letter in Margaret's hand reminded her of Elizabeth's faith. She was more than their rejection. "Give me the letter," Sophie said, her voice firm, her eyes locked on Margaret. Margaret's smile was venomous. "You think you can demand anything? You're nothing, Sophie. This," she waved the letter, "changes nothing." "Then why are you so afraid of it?" Sophie shot back, stepping closer. The room seemed to shrink, the chandelier's light pulsing like a heartbeat. She felt the family's stares, but they no longer mattered. Her dignity, her strength came from within, from the love Elizabeth had seen in her. Evelyn's voice broke the standoff. "Let her have it, Margaret, unless you're scared of what Elizabeth wrote." Margaret's eyes flashed, but she hesitated, her grip loosening. Sophie seized the moment, snatching the letter before Margaret could react. The paper was heavy, the Langston crest embossed in gold, and Sophie's hands trembled as she broke the seal. The room watched, breathless, as she unfolded the single page, Elizabeth's elegant handwriting filling the space. "My dearest Sophie," it began, "if you're reading this, you've faced the worst of them. I'm sorry for the pain, but know this. You are the only true Langston I've ever known. Your kindness, your heart, They are the legacy I choose. The trust is yours, not for wealth, but for freedom. There's more to our family's story, secrets they've buried. Find the book, it holds the truth. I love you always, Elizabeth. Sophie's throat closed, tears burning her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. The words were a lifeline, a confirmation of everything she'd felt but never dared believe. Elizabeth had seen her, chosen her, not for money but for who she was. The mention of the book, the leather-bound one from chapter 1, sent a jolt through her. It was real, and it mattered. "What does it say?" James demanded, his voice tight. Sophie folded the letter, tucking it into her pocket. "It says, 'I'm enough,'" she said, her voice ringing with quiet power. "And that you're all wrong about what makes a Langston." Margaret laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You think a few words from a dead woman change anything? You'll never be one of us." "I don't want to be," Sophie said, the realization crashing over her like a wave. She looked at them, her mother, her siblings, her father, and saw a family bound by greed, not love. She thought of her students, her colleagues, the neighbors who'd shared coffee and laughter. They were her family, the ones who saw her, respected her, loved her without conditions. The Langstons had never been that, and they never would be. Evelyn stepped forward, her presence commanding. "Elizabeth knew you'd say that, Margaret. That's why she planned for this moment." "What do you know about it?" Claire snapped, her voice shrill. "Who even are you?" Evelyn's smile was cryptic. "Someone Elizabeth trusted, and someone who knows what's in that book." Sophie's heart skipped. The book again? She glanced at William, whose nod was almost imperceptible, then at Henry, whose face had gone ashen. He knew something. About Evelyn, the book, or both. But his silence, his refusal to fight for her, was the final cut. She was done hoping for him. "I'm leaving," Sophie said, her voice steady, her decision made. "Not because you told me to, but because I choose to. You're not my family. You never were." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "You walk away, you get nothing. No trust, no name, nothing." "She already has everything," William said, his voice calm but firm. "The trust is hers, legally binding, and Elizabeth's love, that's worth more than your legacy." Sophie turned, her steps deliberate, her head high. She felt their stares, heard Edward's muttered curse, Claire's gasp, James's scoff, but they couldn't touch her now. She paused at the door, glancing back at Evelyn. "Will you come with me?" she asked, sensing the woman held answers she needed. Evelyn nodded. "Lead the way." As they stepped into the hall, Sophie's hand brushed her pocket, the letter a quiet promise. But a sound stopped her, a soft creak from the staircase above. She looked up, her breath catching as a shadow moved, fleeting but deliberate. Someone was watching, and on the table by the stairs, half hidden by a vase, was the leather-bound book, its crest glinting in the dim light. "Who's there?" Sophie called, her voice sharp. No answer came, but the air shifted, heavy with secrets. Evelyn's hand grazed her arm, a silent warning. "Not here," she whispered. "We need to go." Sophie nodded, her resolve hardening. She'd walk away from the Langstons, but not from the truth. The book, the shadow, Elizabeth's secrets, they were hers to uncover. And as she stepped into the rain-soaked night, Evelyn at her side, she felt a surge of freedom tempered by a question that burned. What were they hiding, and who was watching her? The rain had stopped, leaving the Connecticut air crisp and sharp, scented with wet earth and possibility. Sophie stood on the porch of Elizabeth's cottage, a modest clapboard house nestled at the edge of the Langston estate, its white paint peeling but its warmth undimmed. The mansion loomed in the distance, its windows dark, a monument to a family she'd left behind. In her hand she held the leather-bound book, its embossed crest catching the dawn's first light. She hadn't opened it yet, not fully, but its weight felt like a promise, a final gift from the grandmother who'd seen her when no one else had. 3 weeks had passed since the night she'd walked away from the Langston dining room, Evelyn at her side, the shadow on the staircase a lingering question. Sophie had spent those weeks untangling her heart, sifting through pain and betrayal to find the truth beneath. Her worth had never depended on the Langstons' approval. It lived in her. The ink-stained teacher who'd loved her students, the granddaughter who'd sat with Elizabeth through long afternoons, the woman who'd faced humiliation and chosen dignity. Elizabeth's $5 million trust wasn't just money. It was proof of that worth, a call to build a life that honored it. The cottage door creaked open, and Evelyn stepped out, her coat replaced by a simple sweater, her sharp features softened in the morning light. "You're up early," she said, her voice carrying that cryptic warmth Sophie had come to trust. Though questions about Evelyn's past, who she was, why Elizabeth had trusted her, still lingered. "Couldn't sleep," Sophie admitted, her fingers tracing the book's cover. "I keep thinking about her, about what she wanted for me." Evelyn leaned against the porch railing, her eyes on the horizon. "She wanted you to be free, not just from them, but from the idea that you needed them." Sophie nodded, the words sinking deep. She thought of Margaret's icy triumph, James's smug disdain, Claire's false pity, Edward's cruelty, and Henry's silence, the deepest cut of all. She'd spent years chasing their approval, believing their name defined her, but standing in Elizabeth's cottage, surrounded by memories of tea-stained mugs and handwritten letters, she saw the lie. Her worth was in her kindness, her resilience, the love she gave and received from those who mattered. The Langstons weren't her family. They never had been. "I'm going to use it," Sophie said, her voice steady, a decision made. "The trust. I'll pay off my debts, student loans, the car, all of it. I want a clean slate. Then I'm traveling, not to escape, but to see the world Elizabeth told me about. Italy, maybe. She loved their art, their stories." Evelyn's lips twitched, almost a smile. "And the rest?" "A non-profit," Sophie said, the idea crystallizing as she spoke. "For kids like my students, ones who feel invisible, who need someone to believe in them. I'll call it the Elizabeth Langston Foundation. Education, mentorship, a safe place to dream. That's her legacy, not the mansion or the money." Evelyn's eyes softened, and for a moment, Sophie thought she saw tears. "She'd be proud," Evelyn said, her voice low. "She always was." Sophie's throat tightened, but she didn't cry. She'd shed enough tears for the Langstons. Instead, she opened the book, its pages yellowed but crisp, Elizabeth's handwriting filling the margins. It wasn't a diary, not exactly, more a record of the Langston family, their secrets laid bare. A scandal in the 1920s, a hidden adoption, a fortune built on questionable deals. One entry caught her eye. "Henry knows, but he's too weak to act. Protect Sophie. She's the only one who can break the cycle." Her heart skipped. Henry knew. About what? The adoption? The deals? She thought of his trembling hands, his whispered, "It can't be," when Evelyn appeared, and Evelyn herself, her cryptic comments, her connection to Elizabeth. Sophie glanced at her, questions burning, but Evelyn's face was unreadable. "Did you know about this?" Sophie asked, holding up the book. Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. "Some of it. Elizabeth wanted you to have it when you were ready. There's more, but it's your story now." Sophie closed the book, her resolve hardening. She'd uncover the truth. About the Langstons, about Evelyn, about the shadow she'd seen that night. But it wouldn't define her. She was done letting their secrets control her life. A car pulled up, gravel crunching under its tires. William Carter stepped out, his briefcase in hand, his rumpled suit a familiar comfort. "Sophie," he called, his voice warm. "I've got the trust paperwork, it's all yours." She met him at the porch steps, the weight of the moment settling over her. "Thank you," she said, meaning it, "for everything." William's eyes crinkled. "Elizabeth knew you'd make it count. Just don't let them pull you back." "They won't," Sophie said, her voice firm. She thought of the mansion, its cold grandeur, and felt nothing but relief. She'd walked away not as a victim, but as a woman who'd chosen herself. Her family wasn't the Langstons. It was Elizabeth's memory, her students' trust, the friends she'd yet to meet. It was love, respect, the things that endured. As William spread the papers on the porch table, Sophie signed her name, each stroke a declaration of independence. The sun rose higher, painting the cottage in gold, and she felt Elizabeth's presence, a quiet strength guiding her forward. She'd build her non-profit, see the world, live a life that mattered. And the book's secrets? She'd face them, not for the Langstons, but for herself. She looked at Evelyn, then William, then the open road beyond the cottage. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it. This story began with a woman who felt like an outsider, a teacher named Sophie who faced betrayal but found her strength. It's a tale of family, not the one we're born into, but the one we choose, built on love, respect, and the courage to stand alone. As Sophie walks into her future, we invite you to reflect. Who is your family? What legacy will you leave? Thank you for joining us on this journey, for feeling Sophie's pain and triumph, for trusting us with your time. Her story ends here, but yours continues. Make it one worth telling. With gratitude and hope, we bid you farewell, until the next tale calls.